This is Karen with NewClevelandRadio.net, and it is time for Avoid the Maze. And most recently, um, our shows have been centered around individuals who maybe have an emotional disenchantment from something, and they find themselves walking around in circles before they can figure out where they want to go with it. Life is like that. In fact, as I was telling my guests today, we've been running into internet problems with just about every show we're going to do. And you know what? Sometimes just have to go with the flow and just make things happen. But so far, we have a great internet connection with my guest, Brian Clate. And I met Brian through podmatch.com. And when I read his bio, I thought, I don't know where this is going to go, but I think Brian has a very interesting story that can encourage many of us. Um, and I'm not going to even give it away. I'm going to let you tell your story because so many of us think we're the only ones who have a problem. Nobody else has a problem in their life. And not that I wish this on anybody, but Brian, the fact that you found a way to get to where you are today, kudos to you, and maybe you can help somebody else along the way. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So my name is Brian Clate, and I've
Don't know where that's from. Go ahead.
So my story. It's really long if I tell the whole thing, right? I'm old, and so we won't start with the very early days of Brian. What we'll jump into is when I started to enter the adult world.
Okay.
And when I did that, it was it started with me having to recognize, number one, at the ripe age of 18, that the world, as much as I thought it needed me, it was being very clear that I needed to grow a bit before I was ready for it.
Okay.
And what does that mean? I was living in my parents' basement at 18. I had a full-time job, and I thought it was the greatest thing ever. I was ready to be independent, working at a large company, making what felt like really good money at the time, but I couldn't find my way out of my parents' basement. It didn't matter. I apartments, condos, if I wasn't willing to live in my car. So life kind of came and hit me in the face. And it said, the things that you think and the way that you think you're living and what you thought was valuable and was going to move you forward isn't going to do it. And so the first thing I had to do is, at that point, I had to ask for help, which was something I was just no good at.
Most of us aren't good at asking for help.
No, I was terrible, absolutely terrible at asking for help. And I had to ask the two people for help who I was trying to get away from, which was my parents.
Right.
And very much, my parents were very gracious. They helped me, and I went to college, spent 4 years at college, came out, and now I was really ready for the world, because now I had that magical piece of paper that says you have now been bestowed greatness upon you. We've given it to you. In reality, what that allowed me to do was actually get a job that allowed me to start becoming more independent.
Okay.
Right. So I learned a little bit of independence in school, but now it was really time to be independent. All my problems were mine. And through this process, what I also learned how to do was I started relearning how to be successful.
Okay.
And I was being successful in a very narrow way. And I was gauging my success not based on anything other than how I was doing within work. Very common. And so, years go by, and I continue to receive, promotions after promotions. I'm fast tracked. I get lots of cool titles, lots of raises, traveling the world, speaking for the organization, speaking for things as an industry as a whole, becoming an industry expert. And in around 2009, the approach that I was taking to do this started to backfire on me. Now, I didn't know this at the time. I thought I was still killing it because I was still being the same person I was that got to that point.
Got it.
So we're talking from a time elapsed standpoint. I graduated college in 96 all the way to 2009. So this isn't like a 3-year thing. This is decade plus worth of time.
Right.
But of course, the reason that I wasn't being as successful as I was previously wasn't me. Couldn't have been me. I'm still the same person. It was everybody else knew that I was working with. So the thing I had to do was just change my job.
Okay.
Now what's important is at this time, I started to manifest some real physical problems. In 2009 is when I woke up one morning and could no longer use my left arm. It wouldn't move.
Wow.
And, I didn't know what had happened. I assumed I'd pinched nerve, slept on it funny, hurt it while doing weightlifting, whatever it was. But it wouldn't lift. But I figured I'd give it time because, as I mentioned, I don't like asking for help. I've never liked asking for help. And there was no way I was going to a doctor because I can solve this. I can solve this all on my own. And I knew what they were going to tell me anyways. So 2009 goes on. I start working for a new company. Arm's getting worse. I go to this new company thinking this is a great place. And yeah, I fail. And it's the first time I've ever failed in the business world. And, I spent some time reflecting on what it was, but I had so many people around me telling me it's not you, it's them. It was very easy for me to continue to say, all right, it's not me, it's them. I'll just go get another job, which I did. Went to work with a very good friend, a former mentor of mine up at another company. And when I did that, my arm still doesn't really want to work that well. Now to go work at this company, I have to leave my family.
Wow.
I leave, the woman I've been married to since 2000, since I've known since we were in college. I leave a newborn child and two other kids who are just now going into a new school. So I leave them all for 4 to 5 days a week because that's where the job takes me. And I am the only person who works in the family. So it's my responsibility, right? So deep down, I've got the responsibility. I have to keep providing for the family. That's a place where I add value. And to do that, I must go away. When I first get there, things are going great. What I'm doing, people are supporting. The company has a huge amount of success in the space that I've been brought in at. However, they keep giving me the same feedback I'd gotten for the last 5 to 7 years about the area that was going to, at some point, derail me. And it wasn't like I wasn't hearing it. And by the way, that area was, I'm just mean at times. I'm not a pleasant person to be around. I can get results, but the way I go about getting those results, many times left a lot of people feeling damaged.
Right.
And while I heard it and I was, ready to tackle it as the next challenge, because from a knowledge standpoint, I was at my peak. I was good. I didn't need to go learn any more of that stuff. I needed to learn how to, not be a jerk anymore. And by the way, my left arm still doesn't work. So I keep going to all these seminars. I keep reading all these books. I keep talking to people who have tried to do this on their own. I keep implementing new things. Nothing changes. As a matter of fact, it's getting worse. So while from a technical standpoint, success after success after success is lining up, what's becoming worse and worse is my relationships with individuals in those companies. And these individuals all have C titles.
Got it.
Right. So what winds up happening is we go through a program called the Value Leadership Program. This is a program that was brought in by the company, and they put 30 of their right under C-level people through it. And the goal was to teach you a new way of leadership.
Okay.
And so at the beginning of the program, we were asked to be willing to try something different. And of course, I resisted it. I said, no. this has worked for me so far. I just have to get through this program. And I remember I actually sat in like a hidden little dark corner, hoping that I could just sit back in it.
Sure.
And avoid everything that was being presented to me. To kind of shorten this up, as part of the program, I was selected by my peers to lead the team for the next 9 months to help us solve a technical issue. Right? There was a technical, and I said, Brian, we want you to solve it. And all the while I'm resisting. I'm like, no, because I know you don't like me. I know you don't like the way I do these things. And why are you picking me? And a friend of mine walked up and said, we're picking you because this is a chance for you to do something differently. Now, the project is going on, and I'm working with a person who's leading it. And he pulled me off to the side and said, Brian, your team has asked for you to be the leader. You've accepted it. And I said, yep. And he said, all right, you can be the leader, but you have to lead my way. And looked and said, all right, of course. Yeah, sure. I'll lead your way. And the individual started helping me see where it is that things were falling apart for me. And we went through some exercises during a session where we started to target the beliefs that we held about ourselves that were limiting us from achieving our goals. And I went through the session and I wrote some things down and I declared them to the world and all that good fun stuff, and nothing happened. And then the next day he said, Brian, your job is to be me. So your job is now to take this group through the exercise. But instead of telling them what to do, you need to control the energy in the room through yourself. So sit here. And I sat there thinking, all right, whatever. Sure, I'll control the energy in the room. But things got weird when I sat in that chair. Because even though I sat in the center of the room, I was not the center of attention. Everybody else was. And I wasn't allowed to leave the chair. And so all I could do was focus on what was going on in the room. What did it feel like? What did it sound like? And I started listening. And I was able to hear conversations as if I was sitting right next to people who were 30, 40 feet away from me. And we did this, and I could tell what I was being asked to do now. The room went from one of quiet and secretive to one of, because I was able to hear everything and I was becoming excited. People were excited to start talking. The room got louder and louder and louder. And at the end, people were very willing to talk and very willing to share. Now, that night I went home and came to my temporary house, and I decided I was going to go for a walk at night. And as I was walking at night, I finally did the exercise for real around my limiting beliefs. What was it? How was it that I saw myself? And in doing so, getting really honest with yourself, it all hits you like a ton of bricks. I'm in my early 40s. I've lived with these things for a long time, and I finally let them go, or at least let it out for real this time. I went to bed exhausted, and I woke up and my left arm was working 100% as if there was never a problem. And when I say my left arm didn't work, I mean, to get dressed, I had to grab my wrist and put it over my head to put a shirt on. It would not move.
Wow.
No other interventions, nothing else changed. And so I saw the person the next day running the program, and I said, well, what did you do to me? And he smiled and laughed, and he said, what did you do for yourself? And so we talked about it. And so from there forward, I had decided that it was time to be somebody different. It was time to step into the place that I was supposed to be. And in doing so, it's completely changed relationships at home, the way I view work, the things that I'm doing out in the world, and has really helped me through to be blunt, some life and death situations to where I've come to the life side. So that's Brian's story in a nutshell.
As I'm listening to you, it's not quite what I got from your bio. So I'm so glad that you said it, because it was watching you talk about it. But there are certain things that you've been through that remind me of my younger son, who happens to be in his early 30s. He's always known what he wants to do, but he always felt like he was being beaten down. And about a year ago, he just, like, I don't know what made him do a total flip, but he just, like, you know what? Hasn't been working for me. I can blame the whole world for my life, or I can try to be different. And it's not so much that he's different, but he's more open to seeing what's going on around him. And as I listen to your story, I realize that you probably are very much like him, is that you know how to do the job, you know how to be great at the job, but it was the communication that you just were not tuned into.
So it was well beyond communication.
Okay.
I could communicate quite easily, quite well. Actually, sometimes that was my negative.
Got it. Okay.
I could communicate very clearly. What really was my issue was the word accountability.
Okay.
And becoming accountable for who it is that I really wanted to be and how I really wanted to be. Right. So for me, what had happened is I had convinced myself through things that if we went way back in time, but as a way, I had convinced myself that it didn't matter if everybody else got hurt around me, as long as I was successful. Because success was mine to grab, right? And being a child of the 80s, being a child, a person of the 90s, this was how we were raised.
Right.
I was an athlete. It didn't matter if you hurt that pitcher's feelings when you hit 3 home runs in a row. You hit 3 home runs in a row because that's your job as the batter.
Right.
And so I carried that forward. The thing was that, and what wound up happening was, what I learned was that I stopped being responsible for my own sense of self. I was no longer even accountable to myself. And so I let myself become something, hold beliefs that did not ring true to me. And because of that, I became an actual hurtful person. That's not who I was. That's not who I was growing up. And when I hit the 3 home runs as a kid, it was because I was having fun playing baseball.
Right.
It wasn't for an intent to actually hurt somebody else or to bring them down or to put myself over them. It was just to keep having fun playing a game and playing it at the highest level possible. As I'd gotten older, I'd lost track of that. And so what was important for me was to become accountable to myself and say, all right, Brian, what is it that you're not doing right now in the way that you want to do it, that everybody else can see? And they couldn't, no one could ever put their finger on it. It wasn't like I was running around with big middle fingers up to the world.
Right.
It wasn't. And when you ask people, they could never put their finger on it, but they could feel it. And so I had to change my intents. And the only way you could do that is, instead of looking at everybody else, you had to look at yourself and say, what is my intent of doing what I'm doing right now? How is it that I want to be? And learning which, and we use the term emotional intelligence, which emotion do I want to bring to this right now, for
Right.
what purpose? And if I can be clear on that, then success will happen, and it'll happen in a different way. And that's what I had learned. So I don't know if that's what your son went through, but I can tell you, for me, it wasn't about communication. It was about self acknowledgement, that No one else controls me. I control me. And if I want things to change, I have to, old Michael Jackson, start with the man in the mirror. That's where it goes.
Yep. And that was a lot of what he had to go through as well. And most of us do, because until we are accountable to ourselves, until we know what is making us happy, sad, whatever those emotions are, we can't get any better. And I remember the first time I started working with a coach, I was expecting the coach to be more like a psychotherapist.
Mhm.
And I kept waiting for, well, maybe we'll add this mix of medication, and it's like, no, but I wasn't getting anywhere. I was going week after week after week. And I realized later, after I started working with a coach, why psychotherapy wasn't helping me. It's because the psychotherapist wasn't asking me to reach deep down, wasn't asking me to say, hey, when you did that, where did you feel it? Okay. And obviously, you were feeling a lot of those emotions in that arm that just didn't want to work.
Mhm.
And for somebody who's never been through that, they don't get it. I know they don't, because it's like, how did your arm just go bad? And then all of a sudden you take a walk, you start, thinking deep. And now all of a sudden my arm works. It's like, that's a mystery, but it's not a mystery, because everything we're holding in hurts parts of our body. And when you said that, that's when it was like, I see this connection between you and my son. And then you use the baseball metaphor, and that's his love. That's his life, is baseball. But when you started making these changes, here you are, an employee,
Mhm.
a son, a husband, a father, and friend to many. What happens to the people around you when you start changing?
It depends on who they were. So as a son, my parents really didn't notice much.
Okay.
But what I did notice with my parents is that when I would visit with them, our conversations were different now. I was no longer, and again, it was never anything that was outwardly discussed, but our conversations went from being given advice to just talking about life and growing up.
Interesting.
For my children, part of what caused an even bigger shift in my life, an even bigger change, as an employer, and we'll get to what happened at that company
Okay.
in a second. But my daughter, who was 4 years old, who only knew me on weekends, had came into my bedroom in the morning I was supposed to leave, and was crying and begged me never to go back again. Now, she had never spoken with me in that way, in any way, shape, or form. But she came in, jumped up, put her arms around me and said, "Don't go."
Wow.
And so I had to sit there and go, what am I doing? So even though I had done this work in 2014, this is now in 2016, still 2 years later. And so what happened was it gave people like my kids around me the freedom to actually come talk to me in that way. Now, my wife, on the other hand, who married a very specific person, no longer recognized me. She at one point we were having conversations, and she was convinced that I had been brainwashed. And I asked her a very simple question, which was, did you like the way I treated you for the last 10 years? Is that what you want out of life? And the answer was no. I said, why are you stopping me then? And it wasn't until I came back and the job with the other organization stopped, that we came back, sat down, and had our joint growth together. And there was quite a bit of pain through that. But we came out the other side in a much stronger position. Now, as far as relates to the company that I was working with as an employee, that crumbled. And a big reason that crumbled was that I was actually able to see that even though the organization was putting us through these programs and asking us to change our behaviors, that the leaders of the organization actually did not believe in the behaviors. And because of the level of confidence, that when it wasn't cockiness, it was actually now confidence. I knew what this was. I knew what they were going after. We were highly successful, both as a team that developed emotionally, as a team that accomplished its items. I could see where they were allowing and rewarding and enacting behaviors not aligned with what they had asked us to do. So between that and my family begging me to come back, it was very easy to walk away.
Right.
And we parted very amicably. And then when I did that, I worked for 1.5 years as an employee with another company. And I was very confident when I was there. And it was so confident that at the year mark, I walked up to my boss and said, "It's clear you all don't need me.
Wow.
You just don't need me. We've got to either figure out me doing something different, or I need to move on." And within 6 months, it was time to move on. And so from there, I started my own organization. I said, I'm done being an employee to everybody else. I'm going to start my own organization. I've got 20 plus years of experience, plus I've got this new skill set. Went out, got some additional training, and now, as a person, I'm now doing this for other organizations, for other people, bringing this to them so that their individuals, their teams can benefit from what I had gone through. The big difference is I make sure I hold them accountable to what it is they say they want to be.
And accountability is something that we sort of take for granted. At the corporation that I worked for, was a nonprofit college. They put us through all these emotional intelligence tests. And the whole concept was, that's the way we're going to move. And this is how we want you to be. And if you don't fit, we're going to help you find another job somewhere else. And they did the same thing. They didn't believe in anything that we were learning. And many of us were so excited about new ways to look at things that we started incorporating it immediately into our work. We were walking around with smiles on our faces. We were actually, talking to each other, not at each other.
Mm-hmm.
And then there would be rumors from up above. I think we need to get rid of Sue. I think we need to get rid of Bill. We need to get rid of Karen. It was like, what's going on? You were right. We needed to, to get this information. We needed to grow and expand. And now that we're doing it, you don't need us. And when it came to me, I probably was age-wise the oldest on campus. So I took it very personally. And it was like, I'm sure it's age discrimination, and maybe it's religious discrimination. And, and I finally caught myself and thought, wait a second. You don't want to go back to the way it was. You've learned something. What are you going to do with it? And almost like you, it's like, I'm going to create something.
Yes.
And not all of us can afford to do that. You were, like you said, the sole breadwinner in your family. So that had to have been a little nerve-wracking to say, okay, yeah, I can do this. But sometimes we do need to just jump off the cliff and take a chance.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I was never nervous. where I had come from 5 years earlier, I was so afraid of losing my job. I was willing to put myself and my family through everything that we had done. That was me being nervous. Me being confident was stepping away from it, because I knew what I could do. And so that was the difference. That was the difference between cockiness and confidence. It's how I knew there was a difference. Now, did it mean I had to do things that I'd never done before? Yes. I had to change my relationship, not just with people, but with things. I had to change my relationship to what it meant to be a person out in the world working. I had to change my relationship with money. I had to change my relationship with success and fortune. I had to change my relationships with all of that. And in doing so, within 3 months, I had my first client. I've kept that client since I started in 2017. I've doubled the organization size, all of which, in doing so, I've never had nervousness. I've never had that anxiety, because I've been confident in what it is that I'm doing and why it is I'm doing it. And so knowing that I've changed my relationships and having that internal confidence has actually put me in a position to not just do well, but now having discussions about doing something different, and acting not in a way of folly, but in a way of fortune, and saying, this is the next direction. This is the next direction I need to go. I will not lie. I get a lot of input. Input from family, input from friends, input from the universe.
Right.
That helps you define and identify, and if you're willing to listen, know where not to step that foot and where to step that foot. And when I don't step that foot that way, things go south very fast. But when I can get back on it, the things find their way down exactly where it is that leads to more success.
But haven't you also found that now that you are more open to even feeling what you're going through, that even when you go in the wrong direction, make a mistake, not that it doesn't cause some angst, but doesn't it also cause you to say, well, wait a second, I got to go back and look at this and see where it went wrong, or if it went wrong. I know that's how I've changed, because in the past, I was always afraid to even share my voice. I would be confident inside, but I was afraid that if I spoke it, somebody was going to say, oh, that's stupid, or we don't want to do that. And then I was going to feel terrible. But when I started saying these things out loud, because I knew it made me feel better. And if somebody would look at me and go, Karen, that's not going to work, I was now brave enough to say, explain to me why. Because now we could have a discussion about it. And maybe I was wrong and it can't happen. Hey, I just learned something. I'm a little bit smarter than I was before I walked in here. Or maybe we can collaborate on it and come up with a different way of looking at it and creating it. And I don't walk around, like you said, feeling really anxious. Okay. I remember the first year that my son and I started New Cleveland Radio. Initially, he wanted it to be all sports oriented. But then he looked at me and said, okay, Mom, you can do a couple shows that you want to do. And then shortly after we started it, he went to work for our local baseball team, and he couldn't do his shows anymore. And so I looked at him and I said, we're going to scrap all this. I know what we're going to do. And he looked at me and said, yeah, what? And when I told him, he looked at me and said, it's not going to work. I said, when you can sit down and tell me why it's not going to work, I'll listen. He never did. But after the first year, I lost my first client. In the past, I would have probably sat at my desk crying. And I looked at it and I said, okay, there's another client out there. I'll find that client. And that's the difference when you're not blaming everybody else for your problems. And when you're not constantly saying, if this happens, I'm not successful. Because even losing a client can mean success.
And that's that change in relationships, right?
Yeah.
You change how you view that. And the one thing I'll, because you asked about whether or not I go back, even though I'm on the path, do I go back and look at things and say, did something go wrong? There's two things that I had to do. Oh, there's more than two, but there were two very important things for me. The first thing is I had to eliminate that word, because I wielded that word like a weapon.
Got it.
Because I had had so much success in the past, whenever there was an idea that was different than where I could see something, it was very easy for me to do what your son had did and say, this is wrong. But the worst part is I could sit down and tell them 50 reasons why. Now, the reality is the more I viewed things in the worlds of right and wrong, the more limiting everything became.
Okay.
So the first thing I had to do was eliminate that word and that concept. What I found I had to do that is I had to no longer personalize results. So to your point, if a client left, I couldn't take it personal. There's a reason they left, and I would want to understand why they left. But I could no longer view it as my failure. I could no longer let it become me being tagged as a failure. Let me rephrase it that way.
Right.
There was definitely a failure that resulted in losing a client. There was definitely a success when a new one came. But a new client coming didn't mean I was a success, and an old client leaving didn't mean I was the failure.
Right.
So when I say depersonalize it, folks a lot of times ask, well, how do you talk about personal accountability, but then you say you depersonalize things? The personal accountability is recognizing that, number one, there was a failure here, and I own portions of this. And so let me understand those portions I own. And then let me determine, is that really what I wanted? Because sometimes you have to split ways.
Absolutely.
Because you no longer align with those individuals. They're looking for something different. Sometimes they've outgrown you. Sometimes you've outgrown them. And once you've depersonalized it, and you can say, okay, we can both move on now. In today, and it's hard to talk about a lot of times, but you see out, all you can do is turn on TV. You see personalized attachments to an idea. Sure. And an inability to let them go. And the anger and the conflict and the destruction that it has the opportunity to bring, and the victimhood that people love to kind of bask in.
Yes.
And when people are in that state, there's a sense of righteousness. Again, that word right, and everybody else is wrong.
Yep. And
so the more that I can, for myself, disconnect from that and be able to say, I have a thought on it. I have a feeling on it. I have an idea, but let's sit down and actually talk it through. And let me actually be ready to hear your ideas. More times than not, the solution is not going to be mine. There was some study out there, and I wish I could name it. They did a huge study, and they asked people to work as individuals and then asked for people to work as groups, but actually listen. And what they found was that 90% of the time when people worked as individuals, they performed they scored lower scores than they actually did when they worked together as a team. And of the 10%, the majority of the 10% where an individual scored better or as good as they did when they were a team, it was that person had significant prior experience in the thing they were asking them to do.
Interesting.
So what did that say? It says that if you and I aren't an expert in something, and there's a problem that's out there, there's an opportunity out there, my way of solving for it or my way of doing it by myself is not going to be as good as if you and I sit down to this new idea and come up with a way to tackle it. So you mentioned that, you're creating with others,
Right.
you co-creating. It's proven itself out on multiple studies that is, unless you have an absolute expert in the room, that's how you get the best results.
Well, that might explain how I got through graduate school then. So everything was in teams, and it used to bother me in the beginning because it was like, we didn't even use Zoom. It was emails back and forth. But I remember that I too felt more confident once I got to know, once the team sort of talked things out. Okay, this is the area that I'm really good in. This is what I can bring to the table. And when everybody showed where their strengths were and we put it together, I mean, it was dynamic. And
Yes.
yet, if I had done it myself, one or two areas may have been really good. The others may have suffered because I wasn't as strong in those areas. So that's why, teams have a great place in just life circumstances. I mean, a family is a team,
Yeah.
if we all get together and we take our dinner dishes to the sink, okay, things can go a little smoother, a little bit faster, and maybe mom doesn't have to do it all.
Yeah.
But so let me ask you a question.
Sure.
So you're now coaching.
Mhm.
How do people find you? I mean, it's like, and I've asked this to a number of coaches because there are people that are listening to our podcast and they're saying, well, I don't even know how to find a coach. And it's like, well, keep listening. And they're listed under Avoid the Maze. And I'm sure you can find somebody. But do you have to go knocking on doors looking for clients?
It's interesting. I thought I was going to have to. And for me, I've been very lucky in that clients have found me through not the normal path. Right. So I created the website and I'm like, all right, let the phone calls start, and I'm diligently looking at all my counts and all my metrics and nope, none there. So, all right, run some ads on Google. That'll work. Nope, doesn't work either. The way that I got my first client was I actually reached out to a recruiter who was looking for a person to take a role that was more technical than coach.
Okay.
But it was technically what I had done for 20 years.
Got it. Okay.
And so I talked to the recruiter and said, this is my background. Would they be interested in having me come on as a consultant? Now, in the coaching world, there's this big, the consultant word is like a no-no. Don't ever use that word. And had I stuck with that no, or being a consultant is wrong, I'd probably be living with my family, someplace very different, doing a very different job. Probably my company would have been shut down within 6 months. But I said, there's an opportunity.
Absolutely.
So I didn't look at it and say, well, they're not looking for a coach, so therefore not doing it. I saw it as the opportunity, said I can consult. Now, the interesting thing was I went through the interview process and they rejected me. And I reached out, I talked to the person and I said, I'm really surprised. And they said, yeah, I'm really surprised. I said, who's the head of the department? And they gave me the name of the head of the department. And I reached out to that person on LinkedIn and said, I know that I went through, the process and y'all rejected me. You and I never got a chance to talk. Can we talk? And the person said, yeah, let's go talk. And so we met up, had a 45-minute conversation. And during that 45-minute conversation, he said, you're absolutely the person I want to come in and sit in this role. And it was as a consultant, consulting for them on how to deliver a project. But at the same time, he said, the reason I want you to come in is I want you to bring your philosophy and your approach to the team. I can't bring you in as a coach, but I can bring you as a consultant. And I want you to show and demonstrate and help people work in this way. So I come in the company. It's exactly what I do. Now, while I'm there, I'm still making connections, and people come and go and leave that company. And those who liked what I did have asked me to go and help them at other companies. But the short of it is what I've had to learn is that the traditional ways wasn't going to work for me because I'm not a traditional person. I went to Vegas and I was there receiving an award. And there was a person that came in on the last day of the seminar. And I always joke with her about this. She looked like a bag lady. We didn't see her for the first 2 days. She comes in on the last day, quite literally looking like a disheveled bag lady. And she comes in and she starts asking these doctors and these surgeons and these heads of medical departments at colleges questions that were just, you didn't know where they were coming from. And I said, I gotta talk to this person. I don't know why, but I have to go talk to this person. And everyone else shunned this person. Everyone was like running away from this person. So I walked up and talked to the individual. And I said, I just saw you in there. I was in there. I saw you asking these things. And her first question to me was, well, what do you do? And didn't answer my question. I said, all right, so odd. So I expressed what it is that I did. And she said, all right, come with me. We're going to go to this bar. Me and these 7 people are going to go to this bar. I want to learn more. I said, all right. She became a client. So the point in it is the way that I, as a coach, find clients typically is I just listen. I don't shut off opportunities. I do things that are outside of my normal comfort zone, like going on podcasts. And people who have an interest can tell that there's some type of connection and they're able to find me. And that's the main way I find clients. I think something like 95% of all coaching clientele is through referral.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So unless you're able to build those networks and build those relationships, as a coach or even as a consultant, it's going to be difficult.
It's interesting because you said that you don't take the norm like many coaches, but I'm finding that individuals like yourself, when we step out of the box, our success is totally different from others. Because I find, and almost every podcaster that I have here at New Cleveland Radio, they are individuals who I saw somewhere, heard them speak somewhere, and I just approached them and said, would you like a show? One in particular, I met her for about 5 minutes one day. Something about her that just said, she has a story to tell. And she has many stories to tell. And so I started following her on Facebook. And for 1 year, I followed her and I kept saying, wouldn't you like to do a podcast? And finally, one day she called me and she said, okay, let's meet. Tell me what this is all about. And when I did, it was like, yeah, I want to do this. And here we are 4 years later, and we're still doing it. Okay. So what I'm going to say to our listeners who are saying, how can I get out of my rut? Because that's usually when we're really ready to go meet with the coach. Okay. Until we can recognize that there's something going on. Like you said, when somebody pointed it out to you, it wasn't as influential until you felt it. And I'm asking our listeners, if you don't remember who Brian was, but you're thinking about it a couple weeks from now or a month from now, and you're saying, I need a coach, please contact us at New Cleveland Radio, because everyone who comes on the program, I've got their bio. And I'm not going to tell you to go meet up with Brian or to meet up with Candace or to meet up with Jennifer. But I'm going to give you some information. I'm also going to listen, like Brian said, to what your basic story is and know that, hey, Brian talked about that on the show. Jennifer talked about it on her show. Here's 2 names. Contact them. And the best thing is that you can do this all through Zoom now.
You can do it through Zoom, and Zoom's go on your phone. I mean, it's basically anywhere and everywhere. When I first started, most of the stuff I did was in person.
Yep.
Part of the reason is I like to do my stuff outdoors.
Okay.
I like to take clients outside, and not just like outdoor to the local park, but infuse the outdoors, whether it be walks around lakes, walk through woods. I've taken people mountain climbing. And when I'm able to do that, folks actually are able to start to see things very differently. And you give them even more space. The one example that I give a lot, because it's one of the simpler ones, is I was walking with a person and they were having difficulty. And as we were walking through this area, we were down in a chasm, and I asked them just to pause for a second and explain what they saw around them. And they described what they saw around them, and they focused on this tree that was up on a ledge. It looked like its roots were hanging. And I just asked her to describe it, and she said that tree is struggling. It's just clinging to life. And it was very telling about that individual. We had hiked up to a vantage point now where we were above the tree. And if you took a look at the tree was extremely robust. It was well stabilized on this piece of rock, and it was flourishing. And I asked her, can you describe that tree? And she described it in that manner. And I pointed out to her that was the same tree you saw down below.
Wow.
It was about perspective.
Absolutely.
And so when I can use props like that, so yes, we can do Zoom. And COVID made people change how it is that they did it. You can use Zoom. But the more that you can get out of that space, at least, when I work with folks, it's even if I worked with folks through Zoom, I always encourage them to go outside and do something, because I'll always ask what's something I can do. And we'll talk about it. And 95% of the people I work with will go, if they don't go outside with me, they go outside with themselves, so that they can understand the difference in perspective.
I love that. So how can our listeners find you? What's the best way?
The easiest way to get a hold of me is honestly through the phone. Right? That's the one thing that seems to be with me more times than not. But there's a couple of ways to get a hold of me. You can contact me at phone 860-341-1198, call or text. You can go to our website, which is awakenedexplorations.com. You can send an email, brian.clate@awakenedexplorations.com. I know people have Facebook page. I have a Facebook page. I use it, but if you want to get a hold of me, that's probably the last one you want to use.
Okay, absolutely. Well, you've got a great website, and we're going to put all this in the show notes, because if our listeners are anything like me, they heard all that and now they have since forgotten it. But I will say, Brian, that I am delighted with your story because I have known others who, like you, whether it be their arm, migraines, something, just developed. Nobody knows what to do about it. It doesn't seem to be going away. You seem to learn how to live with it.
Yep.
And then you make a change, and all of a sudden it's like, I can move. I don't have a headache anymore. It's a spiritual thing in some way. Okay. It's not magic, but we can sometimes make ourselves very ill. And
Yes.
obviously you did. And I'm so glad that you are doing well and that your family is happy to have you at home. That's the best part of it. But I have to ask one more question. Do you still
Sure.
play baseball?
No. So when I was a kid, and I call kid my teen years, I was actually a Major League Baseball prospect.
Wow.
I gave it all up out of fear of being successful. Gave it all up, walked away from the game. Now, every once in a while, I'll pick up some softball, but I'm older and my Achilles don't work very well anymore. So now I'm more of a watcher of the game. But no, I still love the game.
What's your favorite team?
Cubs.
Well,
That's
my
right.
son,
That's
my
right.
son
Take
almost, yeah, my son almost went to work for them. He interviewed with them a couple weeks ago, but he accepted a different position. He is now working for the Mets farm team in Binghamton, New York. So he too wanted to be a player,
Yep.
but he saw the game as the game's supposed to be played. And in high school, referees or umpires don't see it that way at all.
Yeah.
And he just finally himself walked away and said, I'll be part of it somehow, someday. And he is. So
Excellent.
well, enjoy the Cubs and we'll have you back again. I love it. And say hi to your family for us. Okay.
We'll do that. Thank you.
Have a great day. Thanks. Bye-bye now.